appear at the top, but who would nevertheless be referred to by these names for the sake of convenience. Mark is some unknown person. Matthew and Luke, again, are said to be, we don't know who exactly these persons are. Luke was said to be a physician of Paul, but nobody can be certain that that is the same Luke who wrote Luke and Acts. And John, son of Zebedee, may have had something to do with the initiation of the Gospel according to John, but Raymond Brown thinks that Gospel of John went through 5 stages of editing, and 3 persons worked on it, starting with John, son of Zebedee, followed by an evangelist, and then finally the redactor.
Time is up, Mr. Ali.
First thing I noticed that during your arguments, I think you noted, or you cited Dr. Brown more than you actually said the Quran, which I find really interesting. Second thing that I noticed is that in terms of blasphemy, you're a blasphemer until you prove yourself right. Like, I mean, I can say that I can fly, but until I fly, I'm a liar. Or I can say that I can run 1,000 miles an hour, but I'm a blasphemer until I actually do it. So, sure, he died his death as a blasphemer, but once he was resurrected, he was true in his claims of being the Son of God. If you have any.
Okay, I'll just repeat the question. So he noted, first of all, that Mr. Ali quoted from Brown more than the Quran, which he thought was interesting. And secondly, he... what was the second question?
About one...
Oh, yeah, you're a blasphemer until you're proven true. And so that was the whole purpose of his resurrection, to prove that he actually wasn't blaspheming.
Okay, now, as for the first question, yes, I did quote from Raymond Brown more than I quoted from the Quran. And the reason for this is that in a discussion such as this, if I quote from the Quran, my Christian friends will ask me, well, why should I believe what you're quoting from the Quran? That's not an authority for me. But since Dr. Craig has said that Raymond Brown is one of the greatest New Testament scholars of our time, and Bruce Metzger, whom you all recognize and respect, says that if you can have only one book on the New Testament, let it be Brown's introduction to the New Testament. So I feel that by quoting from this authority, the points would carry more weight, and they would have to be believable. Otherwise, we would have to reject all of these scholarly attestations for this great scholar of the New Testament. Second, I don't think it is true to say that we are all blasphemers until we are proven innocent. In fact, it's quite the opposite. Everyone is presumed innocent until proven guilty. However, in the apologetics that has been presented for the resurrection of Jesus, what Dr. Craig and others tell us is that Jesus died the death of a blasphemer, and nobody could believe in him until they experienced the resurrection. Even his disciples who lived and walked with him, they had to know that he is a blasphemer. And the only thing that could reverse that judgment is his resurrection from the dead. And I'm saying that our position now is just the same as the disciples were on the Friday night following the crucifixion. We should make the same judgment until someone proves to us that Jesus is actually resurrected from the dead. And when we see that the reports about his reappearance are so self-contradictory and mutually contradictory, and when we see that the reports cannot positively identify Jesus, and in the first place we cannot really be assured that he had actually died, I say that the case for the resurrection is really weak, and we can only believe in Jesus if we believe the Quran that he was not a blasphemer, he was righteous from beginning to end and all the way in between.
Well, that is not the voice of someone who is looking at the evidence objectively. If we look at the evidence objectively, we will say, yes, Jesus was a blasphemer for claiming these things if he didn't rise from the dead. And that puts the Muslim in a very awkward position, because the Quran says you must believe what Jesus said because he was a prophet. Jamal Badawi says Muslims are warned that anyone who accepts some prophets and rejects others, in fact rejects them all. For a Muslim to believe in Muhammad and reject Jesus is to violate his own holy book, end quote. But if Jesus then claimed to be the Son of Man and Son of God, you've got to believe in him. Now, how can you do that if he was crucified? Well, by the resurrection of the dead, which showed he wasn't a blasphemer after all. Rather, he falls into the category of the Jewish martyr, someone who was wrongfully executed by the authorities, but vindicated by God and thereby shown to be innocent and true.
I'm a Christian. The point to me that brought me by Muslim. It's in Matthew 12:38 and 40. The Pharisees were asking Jesus, "Teacher, we want to see the sign from you." he answered, An evil and adulterous generation craves for a sign, and yet no sign shall be given to it but the sign of Jonah the prophet. For just as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the sea monster, so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. As far as
just 5-second question.
Jesus is supposed to be like 2 days, and he rose on the third day.
Okay. He read from Matthew 12:38 to 40. Says he'll be dead for 3 days, but unfortunately, it's not. When you tally up the time there, it's not. Doesn't seem to work out to 3 days and 3 nights.
Scholars who deal with Jewish ways of reckoning time have shown that these are idioms that all basically come to the same thing. Sometimes the Gospels say he was raised on the third day. Sometimes it says he was raised after the third day. In the Jonah prophecy, it's picking up on the words of Jonah. 3 days and 3 nights he shall be in the belly of the whale. And so it's picking up on that. But what these idioms all come to is that on the third day after his death, he will be raised and vindicated by God. And on Jewish reckoning, a day begins at sunset. And a part of a day counts as a whole day. So Jesus was in the tomb on Friday afternoon, all day Saturday, and then Sunday morning. And therefore, on the third day, he was raised from the dead. In fact, as wild as it sounds, if Jesus were interred Friday afternoon and raised Saturday night after 6 o'clock, when the Sabbath was over, then the Jew would say he was raised on the third day. Because by Jewish reckoning, that was on the third day after the crucifixion. So you shouldn't try to press the Gospels for chronological precision as though this was a police report. These are Jewish or Semitic idioms which simply indicate that it was on the third day after the death of Christ that he would be vindicated. And the Jonah prophecy is a useful type or anticipation of this that can be quoted as a proof text.
Yeah, I'm sorry that I cannot agree with Dr. Craig that this is just simply a Jewish idiom. The Abingdon Bible commentary actually notes in Matthew 12:40 that this is a gloss, that some later copyist must have put this in. And because no matter how you tally it up, obviously it does not work out to 3 days and 3 nights. And it is obvious that some later error has crept into it here. According to Mark's Gospel, when Jesus' body was requested to be taken down from the cross, it had already been evening, which would only indicate that the Saturday had already started. And so we cannot get 3 days and 3 nights. But notice something interesting, that Jonah was alive in the belly of the whale, and the prophecy here would have it that the Son of Man should be alive in the belly of the earth, as an argument that has been nicely advanced by Sheikh Ahmad Didat, and it ties in with what I've been trying to present tonight. As Jonah was alive, the Son of Man would also be alive. He was not dead.
Jesus didn't claim to be God. What was he on trial for? Because it would just make sense to me that he didn't claim that he would be easily excused by Pilate because he wanted to excuse Jesus. And that's just
Mm-hmm. Okay, if Jesus did not claim to be God, then what was he on trial for?
Mm-hmm. Okay, first, why was Jesus on trial before the Jewish authorities? The Gospel of Mark, which is the best of the four in terms of the historical accuracy, shows us that when Jesus began his preaching and healing, he already fell into disfavor with the Jews very quickly because he did not subscribe to their extremist interpretations of the law. They prescribed that nobody could heal on the Sabbath, and Jesus demonstrated before them that it would actually heal on the Sabbath. A man with a withered hand stood forward, and Jesus healed him. And according to Mark chapter 3, the scribes and Pharisees immediately took counsel with the Herodians to put Jesus to death. Why? Because he was healing on the Sabbath. Although he explained to them, look, the Sabbath is made for man, not man for the Sabbath. You could actually do good work on the Sabbath. But because they had this idea that anyone who even gathers sticks on the Sabbath, as prescribed in the book of Numbers, should be put to death, they wanted to put Jesus to death for violating the Sabbath rules. And then they put Jesus on trial. They brought false witnesses against him. This is the whole point. Jesus was not justly condemned in the Jewish court. They brought false witnesses against him. In the Gospel according to Mark, it is said that they asked him a question and Jesus replied, "Yes, I am." But comparing that with Matthew and Luke, scholars think that this form in Mark is in fact a later redaction in Mark's Gospel itself, and that Jesus had given a non-committal answer at most. He did not admit to being the Son of God or the Son of Man on this occasion. Nevertheless, they took him before Pilate, claiming that he claimed to be the King of the Jews. And Pilate said, "I found no crime in this man," after Pilate had examined Jesus. Pilate realized that Jesus was not making the kinds of claims that they claimed. But then they pressed Pilate, saying that Jesus did in fact claim this, and if you won't crucify him, we'll report you to Caesar.